Okay, so this is my Dell T1650, and it has Libreboot. It's also Ivy Bridge, and they can be found relatively cheaply on eBay. I believe I paid about $70 for this shipped, and it comes with a Xeon processor. So either way though, let's get into this build. So the first thing I did was test it with a different power supply, because the power supply this one came with was only 320 watts, and the only difficulties I had was some of the older video cards I have wouldn't be recognized by the Dell BIOS with I think Secure Boot on or something similar. So after messing with the settings and replacing the CMOS battery, I eventually got the computer to boot up. So moving on, let's actually install that power supply. So just remove the 4 screws, and there's this kind of a strange button at the back you have to press down on, but after that you can just yank it out of there, and from there we can move on to, well, repasting the CPU. So pretty much this is very similar to a lot of the OEM builds out there, and I will say it was actually relatively easy to work on and didn't have as much of the OEM non-standard stuff as I would have imagined with the Dell computer. But I just used some tube of Arctic Silver, just repasted it. It already has a pretty nice Xeon CPU, so no need to do any swaps there. And I ended up at the time using this ATI card. I believe it's a 7650. Okay, so let's screw in the power supply and add the wiring back to the motherboard and the 6-pin connector on the ATI card. Okay, so let's get into the flashing process. So they actually have some pretty good documentation on the T1650, and I used the latest testing release. There are 2 flash clips you need for this, and after that it's about the same as flashing X230, except you have one SWIC 16 and a SWIC 8. But either way though, I was able to get it working on the first successful flash. So, well, rather than the awkward angle for the flash clips, it was a pretty clean installation process. Okay, so I have 3 backup hard drives and only 1 blue plastic caddy. Since I was on a time crunch, I decided to use some adapters, and since this board only has 4 SATA ports, I kind of was not going to be able to have all the hard drives and a DVD drive at the same time. So I decided to go with installing the hard drives in the 5.25-inch slot. So after removing the 2 DVD drives and taking the front of the case off, I started to install the hard drives. I also had to remove the plastic blue thing, which seemed to not really serve a purpose, but either way though, I was able to get the drives both installed, and it does use this weird thing where a screws on the right for the DVD drive, so these only have 5 screws on them, 4 in the front and 1 in the back. Okay, so now that most of everything was installed, I decided to see what the temperatures were like. And the CPU was fine, but the GPU is running at 80.5 C on idle. So I was going to repaste it, but unfortunately I only had these massive 2mm thermal pads, so it didn't quite go back together right, and I switched to using this Quadro card. Although I will get some new thermal pads in the future and end up reassembling that ATI card. I also wanted to add this USB 3.1 card. It's okay, a little bit inconvenient though, because it requires a SATA power adapter, and I didn't really have one that fit on this like HP OEM power supply. But The nice thing about having like wire cutters, a soldering iron, and heat shrink tubing is that you can make any power supply into a modular power supply. So let's get into that. So step one, find some, well, old wires to essentially strip. It can be from a dead power supply, something you have laying around. I just cut the third SATA power line off there and then began to strip the wires. So after the wires were stripped, I turned on my soldering iron, waited a bit for it to heat up, and was ready to solder the wires. So I added some heat shrink tubing and then used a lighter to essentially just get it nice and insulated. So I have essentially 10 soldered wires on there, and if you have all the parts available, this does seem to at least be reliable enough, although some people might consider it a bit of a fire hazard. Okay, so for the final build, we got our HP power supply, rated at 400 something watts, two 4TB drives, an SSD and a 4TB drive down there, and some quite awful cable management. But everything seems to fit, and the airflow seems to be decent enough. Okay, so NVIDIA Quadro card, Xeon processor, and we got our weird power line extension to our USB 3.1 card. And it's about ready to, I guess, close and seal up. So I guess that finishes the quick desktop build. And some final notes. The Quadro 400 is running under Noveu, or well, however you pronounce that, maybe it's Nouveau. And I am planning on replacing that card, but I imagine the proprietary NVIDIA drivers might fix the screen tear issue if you do have a Quadro 400 or something of that generation. It could also be due to the strange monitor setup I have going on. It's a 3.4 monitor that's just been kind of rotated. Finally, with a Xeon chip and the right ECC memory, you can actually put 32 gigabytes in this system, but otherwise the maximum is 16. So this is Trip Code from Dell Support, and peace, and have a good one.